and hopefully that will go forward. Now, I chose to do this one in the spirit of being an accidental archivist. And so, when I created the title for this talk, it was following on from Luke's idea and our whole idea about CASK and the idea of being accidental, but an accidental archivist, and that's the thing. The word that stands out is not so much archivist as it is accidental. I didn't really set out to become the custodian of anyone's archive, least of all the archive of one of the figures of cybernetics. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about how that accident happened. The living archives tend to arrive in your care sideways through a relationship rather than through a plan, and we've just heard that from Luke and Rob. So in 2022, I was contacted by Mick Ashby, who's the grandson of W. Ross Ashby. Mick was in hospital in Germany. He was ill with leukemia, and he knew that he only had a few months to live. For some years, he'd been building one thing, a complete record of his grandfather's work, gathered onto a website at ashby.de. It was, in every sense that mattered, his late life's work, the patient assembly of journals and books and papers of a man who died in 1972 when Mick was still a young man. So what Mick asked me to do was simple in a way and not so simple to carry it out. He asked me to make sure that the website that he'd spent time working on would live on after he was gone. So in effect, as we just heard, we had a problem of viability. Though neither of us put it in those terms at the time, a system held in a single place and dependent on a single person is a very fragile system. So he and I were on WhatsApp and FaceTime, and we worked together while he still had the strength to copy the whole archive out of his instance in Germany and onto my computer, and then to set it up again on a server here in the United States at ashby.info. So it's been there now for ever since. And I'm intending to make another copy, a third copy of it, if you will, at ashby.org.uk, back on the land where Ross Ashby did his work. And I think there's something fitting in that, is to keep the thing safe, is to refuse to keep it in any one place, as we've been discussing. I think to put it in many places. So that's what I'm going to do here in the next little while. So Mick died in October 2022, and his daughter contacted me, Sarah Voskuhl, and gave me some words for him. And I'd just like to read them because this talk is in part his. Mick was the kind of person who made life lighter for everyone around him. With his humor, his wisdom, and his quiet strength, he showed us what it means to be a good human being. He believed in fairness, in keeping an open mind, and in helping others without hesitation. His voice may be silent now, but what he taught us will stay with us forever. And anyway, I just add that the man who asked me to preserve a record left a rather nice one, good one of his own. So I have find myself looking after a website. It's a large website. Ross Ashby, for example, kept a journal for 44 years, some 7,400 pages across 25 volumes. Alongside his published books, his correspondence, and around 1,600 index cards, of which he filed his own thinking back to himself. The journals went to the British Library in 2003, and the family announced on the last day of his centenary conference in 2004 that they meant to put the journal on the internet. And the website is part of the continuation of that intention. It's meant to be a living record. It's a working set of materials that people can read, cite, and argue with, right? So what was interesting is that I was in a conversation with Manuel Pret Wilson, who is a systems scholar living in Spain. And we were talking about the Ashby archive recently. And he said, oh, it's all there on the website. And I went, oh, okay. So this accident sort of deepened a bit. this PDF was something on the website that Ashby had written in 1941 in his own hand at the pathological laboratory at St Andrew's Hospital in Northampton, where he was working as a doctor. 196 handwritten pages. He gave it the title The Origin of Adaptation. It was never published as far as we can tell. The first section is headed Building a Brain, and that's in 1941, 11 years before he wrote Design for a Brain. So I've been reading a little of it, and with the help of Claude AI, the language model from Anthropic, as we know, we took the handwriting page and we transcribed it. And I think it's the first complete public transcription of the manuscript. And I'm aware, as I say this, that I'm observing my own observing, which is a Ashby kind of idea. And I found that being the keeper of an archive is not so much a passive office. You go looking and the materials look back. So here's somebody who was 38, thinking in his way, in private, towards the ideas that he would later publish, and we would come to remember him by. The vocabulary at that time, 1941, had not yet settled. Actually, he writes of vital variables, of a neutral point, of a break, terms he would afterwards refine or set aside. And the manuscript moves in a straight, deductive line, problem to consequence, quite unlike some of the looser, more exploratory texture of his published work. So it's been interesting to look at a concept sort of turn into a concept and move forward. So what's also interesting about this is that the archive is not just about Ashby. Klaus Krippendorf, he talked about it. So in 2009, Klaus, who had been Ashby's student at Illinois, as I understand it, in the early 60s, published a paper returning to Ashby's information theory, taking up a problem he and his circle had got wrong about complex systems and carrying it forward into questions about cyberspace that Ashby never lived to see. Krippendorf himself died in 2022, actually the same year that Mick died. So we're holding all of this at the same time, in a sense that the Ashby, the students, the grandson, and arguments and unfinished arguments and evolution of definitions and so on, and corrections that he made and so on. And I think that's just sort of an interesting story. And then let me talk a little bit more about Mick, because Mick Ashby did not just preserve this work of his grandfather on the website. He worked on it, obviously, by putting the website together, become quite familiar with it, and he added to it. And I think it's worth noting that he added to it in his later years a theorem of his own, an ethical regulator theorem, which is on the same website as the ashby.info. And so he's got an archive in his own right, the grandson's thoughts sitting with the grandfather's. And I find that rather pleasant and remarkable part of this accidental archiving. So the act of keeping a record became in his hands an act of making one, I suppose, a bit like we are. So, watch for the accidents, I guess. An accidental archivist. This talk has wandered around a little bit. I think it's appropriate given the topic of variety. And this wandered into my custodianship, I suppose, and I didn't choose it. I gave Mick a chance, and he by choosing me, I guess, at the time, because he knew I was doing a lot of digitization work for ISSS in particular. So then we've got a manuscript that, as I understand it, not many people have read for 80 years. It's going to be read again. So what I would offer you here is, as I draw to a close, watch for the accidents. The archives that matter are rarely the ones you plan to keep. They're the ones handed to you, as we've been hearing. often by someone who trusts you to know again what they knew and pass it on before you too. So, and they run short of time. So that is a story about Ross Ashby's archives, Mick Ashby's editions, and my becoming an accidental archivist of that work. So that's the accidental archivist story. And there's lots of work that can be done there. And I'm still going through that PDF. It's got a few little errors in it that need to be worked on. But anyway, yeah, that's that part of the story, and got a few minutes for any questions and reflections on that before I move on to the next one.
Thank you, Peter. That was terrific and a very happy accident. We've got a hand up now. So, Alan, do you want to jump in?
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to start with a really boring question. You've got 3 copies of the website. I was looking for a website earlier today that was written in a book that had only been published 2 years ago, and that website was already down. I assume if you're the one who is registering the domain and renewing it, that if one went down, all 3 could go down. Is that a
No,
possibility?
no, it's not. Because first of all, I've got the whole website on a computer I have in my basement. The ashby.info website is sitting on an ISSS server hosting, which is in the United States on hosting.com, which is where a number of the legacy ISSS websites are that I initiated when we moved off of a rather Byzantine process of having Drupal run the ISSS website. And it was very complicated trying to get to it. And I was trying to simplify things and develop a membership website, among other things. And anyway, it's a long story, but hosting.com was able to take the Drupal site. And so I just literally made a decision to stick ashby.info there. It's $15 a year for the domain, and ISSS is paying for that. And so that's here in the United States, and the ashby.org.uk will be on the UK server of the Cybernetics Society. And so you and I are going to be working on that in the next couple of weeks in some way. And we've already talked about how we might take the website and do other things with it in terms of making it more accessible or useful. Does that answer that, Alan?
Does, yeah. I'm going to ask a more interesting question, I hope. Um, right at the start, just before you got on to your talk, you talked about Len and you mentioned something about his spirituality and spiritual side, which for me, and I've spoken to you about my interest in
Yeah.
cybernetics related to tarot,
Yes.
which is quite a unique area perhaps, but also now I'm interested in Len because there might be a connection there. So
Hmm.
all of a sudden that's made a connection that I'm sort of interested in, and I'm just wondering how we make those connections, which we don't know what they will look like, but how do you might go around improving that ability to make connections, which it sounds like a very systemy thing to think about.
Well, it is. I think we're doing what we can. This is a little step into the archiving world across boundaries. I know that American Society for Cybernetics has had archiving, initiatives, and the ASC 60 had a big focus on archives. I did what I could with the ISSS when I was president, working there and working with a number of other people to pull all the bulletins and journals and together on the website. And we're evolving the Cybernetic Society in the UK in the same way. And Rob is doing what Rob is doing, and I encourage you, as you've just joined us, to look at what Rob's doing with his, or what we're all doing, but with Rob taking the lead on the Systems Community Alliance, where he's got a register at that website. So there's a lot of at least pointing to different archives there. Now, how we build redundancy and how we make sure that if one system goes down, it doesn't take everything down or we lose the thing forever, I think is a design question that we can address coming up. And that's probably a conversation for later on in this week, or indeed over the coming weeks, as we see where we might go with all of this, frankly, with some of the questions that we've already just raised in the past session. So, yeah, does that help,
Yeah,
Alan? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, on the spiritual side, I mean, that's a whole another area of interest. There are a number of members of the American Society for Cybernetics who are interested in indigenous knowledge and how indigenous practices have sort of cybernetic and system-y feels to them, and one might call that spiritual in some aspects of it, or relationships to the land. And I mean, Bradford Keeney, for example, if you're not familiar with his work, he is a cybernetician, or at least he started work as a cybernetician, and he's gone, his whole life's journey has been about the way spirit moves. And he's got a substantial piece of works on the internet. And I definitely encourage you to look at Bradford Keeney's work in the work. I mean, he's a cybernetician, he taught cybernetics. And yet he's been on a spiritual quest around the world, talking to different spiritual leaders about their spiritual practices and how they bring it forth in life and its implications. And he calls it ecstatics. So,
Yeah, just to finish off on that, it's the those connections and the value which I mentioned in the first talk is within the tarot and esoteric community. If you find out about a book that's only one off that's relevant, it becomes incredibly valuable, ridiculously valuable. And I'm just wondering how you build that sort of way of thinking about the value into this.
yeah, good question.
thank you, Peter. I've just put in the chat about how it was interesting. You mentioned the cybernetics and system societies, the ISSS and CIBSOC, and others who might be part of this solution for a viable long-term domain repository. So something we can add into the mix, as you say.
Yeah.